the first episode of Ganer Cooks, the series. For me, cooking has always been a sense of peace at the end of a long day, but a lot of people that I talk to tell me that they feel the exact opposite about cooking, that it makes them really stressed. And I think a lot of times cooking shows make everything seem so fancy and pretty, and so it feels like that's this inaccessible thing that I'm going to look at instead of something that I'm actually going to try to do for my people. So what I want to do is to share with you a little bit of my thoughts on how I put things together. And today I'm going to make something super duper duper easy and super basic for you, and it's pot roast. Everybody remembers having pot roast whenever they were growing up, and whenever I went to the store, literally the only thing that was available that was meat, or even something that was kind of a protein that was edible at this point, was giant chunks of roast. So I thought it might be a good idea to talk about like how to put together a pot roast so that you can make one if that's the only thing you have available in your store. A few of the things that we're going to need to make this pot roast are going to be: one, you need a roast. You want to make sure that the fat content doesn't seem like it's too much, or else you're not getting enough delicious meat for what you're buying. You're also going to need some flour, some salt, pepper. I like to put cayenne pepper, or alternatively you could use something like Tony's seasoning or Bros Bayou Shakedown, some kind of like packaged shake material. We're also going to want to add some herbs. So I have here today, whoops, I just dropped on the ground, I'll wash it, don't worry. I have rosemary that I stole from or borrowed from our neighbor's yard, and some thyme here, which is something that I grow. You can use the stuff that you get in a jar. It's not that big of a difference, but if you have it, it's nice. We'll also want some garlic. I know it's going to be kind of like a sinful thing for me to say, but I just get the chopped up, pre-chopped garlic stuff out of a jar. I haven't had anyone tell me that they noticed a significant difference in the taste. There's a little bit of a difference, but it's not important enough. Next, we're going to have some vegetables. We have an onion. We have about 6 or so carrots. These are already peeled. And we also have some stalks of celery. It's going to make it really taste nice. I'm going to add some mushrooms to mine. Here I have quartered the mushrooms already, so that you're not going to spend some time watching me quarter mushrooms. You can do that, I trust you. But this would be a really, really great dish to throw in any kind of starches you like. So potatoes are going to be really delicious. I kind of spaced out when I was at the store doing my apocalypse shopping, and I didn't buy any potatoes at all. Turnips would also be a really, really great option. Some kind of root vegetable, something like that. The other thing you're going to want to get is a couple of our liquids to make this really work. The first is you're going to need a nice beef broth. You can do this a couple of different ways. You can have store-bought broth in a box, or you can make your own broth. Use it for different soups. So it's a really useful thing to have around in your freezer. I will sometimes, if I'm making chicken, I'll make a chicken broth and set that aside in the freezer for a gumbo later on. So making your own broth can have a utility kind of longer than just a single thing. The next thing you're going to want for the liquid is you're going to want some red wine. I know a lot of us have been buying a lot of red wine lately. Any kind of, I don't know, cheap, crappy wine, red wine is going to be good for this. It's going to cook out all the alcohol anyway. All you're really trying to do is make sure you have some of that floral or fruity kind of flavor kind of underneath things. The next thing I want to talk to you all about a little bit is equipment. What I'm using here is pretty simple. This is just a simple chef's knife. You can get this at Walmart. But you definitely want something that can cut through stuff pretty well. And you're also going to want a cutting board. And the final thing that I want to talk to you all about is the pot that we're going to be using for this particular dish. This is a Lodge cast iron pot. It's very similar to something that you would get like the fancy like La Poussière or whatever thing, but you do want something that has a heavy bottom that you can brown your meat in, and also something that has a lid that you can cover whenever you put it in the oven. The first thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be trying to get a nice brown on the meat. So what I did first was I covered the meat up in a little bit of salt and pepper. Next step is going to be we're going to add a little bit of seasoning to flour. We need a little bit of flour here, and what this is basically going to do is create a kind of crust on the beef. So I'm going to add a little bit of cayenne pepper. I just have a lot of cayenne pepper, but I like my food a little spicy. I'm gonna add some black pepper to this. Then I'm also going to add some salt. So I'm just mixing this up, and then I'm gonna cover the meat. I really want to make sure I'm getting all sides of this. I am going to turn the meat over to make sure that there's a little bit of a brown crust on all sides. This flour that I'm adding to the meat is also going to help us thicken up the gravy. Carrie keeps laughing when I say the word thicken. I'm sorry, but it's true. Whenever I add the flour to the meat, it's going to help us thicken the broth and the wine that I'm adding to this. So it's going to make more of a delicious gravy. Right. The one thing you want to make sure of is after you've handled meat that you're washing your hands so that you don't cross-contaminate things. Nowadays, we're kind of getting used to washing our hands for 20 seconds at a time, so it's super duper important whenever you're preparing food for someone you care about that you're washing your hands, especially whenever you're done handling something like meat. Alright, so the next step we're going to do is we're going to add about a 1/4 cup of oil to our pot. We're going to get it really hot. What we want to do is we want the meat, once it lands on that, to just immediately start sizzling. And all we're trying to do is create a nice browning kind of thing with our meat. We're not trying to cook the meat all the way through. That's all going to happen whenever it goes in the oven. Okay. So while I'm waiting for my oil to heat up, I'm going to chop up this onion. I'm going to julienne this onion, meaning I'm going to cut it in thin little strips all the way along, as opposed to something like dicing it, which I would do in like a spaghetti sauce or something like that. So I'm just going to be cutting this thinly along the way. So what I'm looking for is it to be about that thin. With something like this, it doesn't need to be perfect. This is not going to be a vanity kind of dish where people are going to look at this and say, wow, look how perfectly the onions are cut. No one's going to care. Next up, I'm going to cut up my celery and my carrots, and then we're going to just do a really rough cut of this celery. All I'm really looking for is something that big. You're just cutting it to get nice big chunks in there. Same thing with my carrots. Alright, so I'm done cutting up all my vegetables. Now that my oil is screaming hot, hopefully, we're going to add the meat to it. We're going to leave it. You have to kind of trust this sort of thing. So I'm going to take this out right now, and I'm going to drop it into our pot. Hear that nice sizzling going on in there. I know there's going to be a temptation to peek under the meat, make sure I'm doing it right. You have to leave it here for about 3 minutes. So now that everything's browned on all sides, on the side of the meat, I kind of held it up for a little bit so we brown on the side there as well. But now that everything is nice and brown, I'm going to be adding the vegetables to everything. I usually like to start with the onions. Then I'm going to add, eventually, my carrots, then the celery, and the mushrooms. So we're going to let this do its thing here for a couple of minutes. Now I think everything is kind of ready to get thrown into the pot. We're going to throw in garlic. I love garlic. I don't know that many people who don't like garlic, but if you don't, maybe do half of what I just put in there. I'm going to add our celery. Like so. I'm going to add our carrots. I'm throwing literally everything into this pot. I'm also going to throw my quartered mushrooms in there as well. Add some wine, about a cup of wine. Cook that down. It's going to smell really good in here in a second. Meanwhile, we're going to then cut up our herbs. So I'm going to take this rosemary here. I'm going to pull off as much of the green stuff as I can, and that way I can chop that up. And I'm going to do the same thing with the thyme. So all I'm doing here is just kind of trying to make the herbs a little finer here. You're going to create something about like that, and then you're going to add it to your pot. Alright, so the final thing we're going to add before we cover this thing up is our beef broth. we want to have enough liquid to cover the top of the roast itself. Once that's done, we're going to turn off our pot and we're going to put this in the oven at 350 degrees for 2.5, 3 hours. So our oven has been preheated to 350 degrees. I'm going to add this pot roast to it and then just hang out and have a glass of wine for a couple hours.
Sure.
Of course, I forgot to tell you about something. I'm going to have to open this oven up again and add a couple of bay leaves. So right now we're going to kind of pause our cooking and we're going to take out some of the nasty grease. Out at the top we're going to do a little skimming. You could do this now, you could do it later, but we're going to want to skim some of the fat off of the top. What we're doing now is making a little bit of the, we're going to thicken up the gravy a little bit. So I'm going to add about half a stick of butter or less into this here. I'm going to put on some flour that I had left over from whenever I was making the beef. I'm going to put in a little bit of that, about a couple teaspoons or so at a time. And then I'm going to kind of try to create what's called a blonde roux. So I'm going to add a little bit of this here. You'll see. I'm going to whisk in this flour and the butter. Basically, what we're going to be doing in the next few minutes is going to be stirring this up so that the flour cooks out some of the kind of doughy, floury taste. But what we want is to create a thickening agent so that I can add some of my juice from the pot roast into this, and we're going to make a really, really nice and delectable gravy here. Thicken up the butter and flour. The next step is we're going to add some of the juice from our pot roast. We're going to add this about a quarter cup at a time. By this point, after a few hours, the meat is going to be like so fall apart delicious. You can just add it to your plate with some of the vegetables. Well, there you have it, folks. That's our pot roast for the day. I hope you enjoy this as much as I know we will. It's a very simple recipe, just a few ingredients and a little bit of patience, and then bam, you have an amazing meal that I promise you can do on your own. I know this is a super meat-heavy dish, and I promise you I'm very interested in learning more about vegan options or vegetarian options. As we're moving along in the series, I hope to make some things that are enjoyable for everyone's palate. The goal of this is that we can all try new things together. So please, if you have a suggestion about the next thing we should make, shoot us a comment below and I'm going to give it a shot the next time around. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed the meal.
And now dig in.